I had known how much work this would entail in 2011 when Sam had asked me to be the next convener of the infrastructure report card, I perhaps would have made a totally different judgment in terms of the particular approach. But I must admit, and I concur with Kevin around this, that Sam, your guidance and mentoring has been incredible and phenomenal, and I certainly have learnt a lot over the process in terms of the particular report card. But having said that, I'll go on to present the grades of the various sectors, of which there are 10 sectors that we have analysed in terms of this year's 2017 report card, containing 29 subsectors. Of that, 3 subsectors are new in terms of the approach. But before we get into the actual grades, perhaps we can just run through some of the definitions that you'll see coming up, not different to the 2011 grading system that we applied in terms of the process, where A, on your left-hand side, is world-class infrastructure that is in excellent condition, well-maintained, has capacity to endure pressure and from unusual events. On the other end of the conundrum, we've got the grade of E, where it's unfit for purpose. It has failed, it's on verge of failure, or is exposing the public to health and safety concerns and needs urgent attention and immediate attention or action is required. And in between, we've got B, C, and D, where it's fit for the future, C is satisfactory for now, and D at risk of particular failure. You'll also see, and what we have observed over the last 10 to 11 years, from the 2006 infrastructure report card to the 2017, is a trend in the particular infrastructure or in particular sector. And these trends have been measured over 5 to 6 year periods. So you'll see a first arrow. If it's horizontal, there's been predominantly no change in the state or the condition of infrastructure. If it's an upward arrow, obviously there's been an improvement, and a downward arrow or diagonally downward arrow would indicate deterioration of the asset in terms of the infrastructure space. So we deal with the first particular sector, and that is water. In terms of that, and I'm going to provide a little bit of a definition in terms of how we look at the sector of water. And this includes the bulk extraction and conveyancing of piped water. The unchanged low grade belies a future deterioration in the aging bulk infrastructure portfolio as a result of insufficient maintenance and neglect of renewal, partly because of funding constraints and requirements. There's been a serious depletion of skills in the Department of Water and Sanitation, certainly at the senior levels, and this of course has hindered decisive planning and development to avoid source shortages. Systems are generally operated close to failure. Some projects, major projects, for example, the Lesotho Highlands Water Scheme, Phase 2, are way behind schedule in terms of their delay, and this is going to cause greater service disruptions going into the future in terms of that. Particularly, we've seen some drought-stricken areas in South Africa and the requirements for water, or at least bulk water abstraction. What are we going to see in terms of the water mix is increases in reuse of water, perhaps desalination, and of course, aquifer exploration. Budgeting and spending on maintenance, rehabilitation, expansion remains inadequate for water supply in all areas. And of course, damage increased by service delivery protests that has been mentioned by Sam in urban and rural areas has diverted funding away from maintenance and expansion of particular projects. There's growing demand, certainly from community and the system, from different communities, and the system that is looking at increasing supply failures. Water leakages and other contributors to non-revenue water remain unacceptably high. There's losses in certain places, losses of up to 40% in some cases. This requires immediate action around that. The quality and reliability of water supply has decreased in small towns and rural communities. Incentives resulting from the blue drop and no drop monitoring have assisted in improving municipal management of drinking water quality and water loss. Regrettably, the blue drop report is no longer available. As Kevin had pointed out, getting the information is somewhat problematic. It could be said that the water sector may face a similar crisis to the electricity sector that we faced a decade ago, and it was forewarned in the 2006 IRC. Looking at sanitation, and sanitation comprise the provision of on-site or reticulated sanitation or conveyance of treatment of wastewater. The condition and functionality of sanitation is of greatest concern, especially outside the major urban areas. Although unserved household percentage has decreased significantly since 1994, due to growth in population and households, the actual number remains close to 4 million people that have no pipe reticulation. Green drop performance scores are generally in the good to excellent range around major urban areas. However, many urban facilities are unable to cope with increased demand. Many, as much as up to 30% of all wastewater treatment works are in critical condition, discharging increasing quantities of effluent into our streams and river ecosystems. 66% of wastewater treatment works require urgent action in the short to medium term. The skills required to operate and maintain and manage these technical facilities are often scarce outside of major urban areas. Consequently, downstream users and ecosystems are subjected to high pathogen levels and eutrophication and endure high treatment costs to achieve potable water standards. Inhabitants in some rural areas do not have access to safe sanitation, and pit toilets in rural and informal areas are frequently underserviced, exposing residents to disease and health concerns and issues. Certainly, electricity outages disrupt treatment works, particularly where pumping is required in the process, and can quickly cause temporary shortage of the facilities, and these become overwhelmed and they bypass the facilities and end up in our streams and rivers. However, there are examples of celebration, where we saw in 2014, eThekwini got the Stockholm Industry Water Award for its transformative and inclusive approach towards water, where they connected 1.3 million additional people to piped water and provided access to toilets to a further 700,000 people around that. Solid waste management includes collection of waste from the population at appropriate quality of disposable mechanism. South Africa in 2011 generated 108 million tons of waste, of which 98 million tons ended up in our landfill disposal sites. The first goal of any national management system is to prioritize waste reduction, reuse, recycling and recovery of waste prior to disposal in a landfill. At present, there's less than 10% of our waste is actually diverted from our landfill sites. Of course, the tariffs that are imposed to people that generate the waste are not cost reflective in terms of what we require in terms of our reuse or recycling of particular waste. There has been improvement in certain waste collection areas, particularly in major urban and other areas since 2011 IRC. Approximately 67% of households have access or adequate refuse removal from the service. Particularly in the major urban areas, this percentage is between 86 and 91%, while in the rural areas it's much lower, sitting at about 52%. However, one should consider the figures in the context of urban and rural environment where perhaps low densities require different means of waste disposal. Many municipalities, especially the rural municipalities, have unlicensed landfill sites or sites not operated according to acceptable standards. Around 64% of these general waste disposal sites are currently unlicensed. Although recycling is legislated, there are few incentives to users to change the behavior from biasness towards disposal. However, we are seeing encouraging signs. For example, in November 2012, 4% of the tires that were generated for waste were diverted from our landfill sites. In August 2016, over 60% has been diverted from our landfill sites. So there are areas of excellence. Moving on to the roads network, in terms of that, and the South African road network is managed at 3 different levels. The primary intercity, with economic roads mainly managed by SANRAL on behalf of the Department of Transport. The secondary and tertiary intercity network, which is primary access and mobility of roads largely managed by the 9 provincial departments and/or entities, and the urban and rural municipal roads, which are managed by the local authorities around that. Of the nation's approximately 750,000 kilometers of roads, SANRAL controls just over 21,000 kilometers and maintains them to a high standard. As Sam alluded to, perhaps your own success is perhaps undermined because of your success, and they have to take on further over 5,000 kilometers of provincial roads to bring them to a certain standard. Their overall condition from poor to very poor is slightly above the international benchmark of about 10%. However, the majority of the roads are in a good to very good condition. For paved roads, we have seen good improvements in a number of provinces, namely Gauteng and the Western Cape, of which over 90% of sections in the Western Cape are fair, good or very good, maintaining their standard. However, conditions for paved roads in other provinces are perhaps precarious at the moment and are deteriorating quite fast. This deterioration is a risk, and this is due to vehicle overloading, poor maintenance, and the reduction of skilled personnel in the provincial departments that we've picked up. Road safety is becoming compromised by the condition of the secondary road network. For paved metropolitan roads, regarding municipal roads, data on asset management has been difficult to obtain, even for municipalities that have sound practices in place to the road systems and networks. A particular issue of difficulty is discovering to what extent monitoring is conducted. Furthermore, the data is not readily available to the public, and it's been quite a task, as Kevin had pointed out, to actually get this information and data in terms of that. The primary factors contributing to pavement deterioration has been capacity constraints, overloading, lack of maintenance, high traffic volumes, and poor stormwater management. South Africa's gravel roads constitute about 75% of our road network. There's been some improvement in the Western Cape, which is contrasted with extraordinary deterioration in the Northwest Province. And I say there's large variances between the various provinces that we've managed to ascertain. Gravel roads are in a very unhealthy condition, with perhaps between 2 and 12% in the good to very good condition. And by contrast, the poor to very poor condition applies to 40 to 90% of this category. Airports. AXA is a state-owned company of South Africa, and it resides under the Department of Transport. And there are 9 major airports that Sam had alluded to. The 3 major airports obviously being Oliver Tambo, Cape Town International, King Chaka International. There's other 6 commercial airports, which include Kimberley, George, Upington, East London, Port Elizabeth, and Bloemfontein, that were assessed. The 3 major airports account for 90% of our 39 million passengers that go through our airports on an annual basis. And AXA has proved to be world-class in terms of the aviation standard, and this is, of course, local regulation induced, but also international regulation induced in terms of that. They have received a number of international accolades, and hence the high grading in terms of the B+ of what you see they have achieved. The commercial ports are owned by Transnet, which is a state-owned company, and is represented by the Department or the Ministry of Public Enterprise through its 3 different business units, namely the Transnet National Ports Authority, the Transnet's Ports Terminals, and the South African Port Operations. The Transnet National Port Authority is responsible for the ports and the infrastructure. And by port infrastructure, we are referring to the breakwaters, the quay walls, the terminal areas, the lighting, and of course the navigation systems for that. There are 9 ports in the Transnet stable, 7 are commercial, namely Saldanha, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Nkuru, East London, Durban, Richards Bay, and 2 minor ports, Port Nolloth and Mossel Bay. Much of the infrastructure has been aging over a period of time, but TNPA has made concerted efforts to repair and maintain its equipment and infrastructure, keeping it operationally and serviceable. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 30-year demand cycle in terms of the Transnet's demand forecast in the next 30 years, in terms of the infrastructure that has been developed. There needs to be some preventative maintenance done on the breakwaters to date. Of course, there are the number of ship repair docks that could potentially be an economic spinner for South Africa or could apply for economic growth. However, these are in a deteriorating situation and needs sufficient maintenance and repair to look at this. This could perhaps also be a source of job creation. Looking at the rail, in terms of the various lines, South African rail environment can be divided in 2 predominant components. One is the freight rail network, and the other is the passenger rail network of South Africa. There's approximately 22,500 route kilometers of freight rail that is owned by Transnet, of which 1,500 kilometers is for heavy haul, which is for the export of coal, iron ore, and manganese. Just over 11,000 kilometers of rail is for general freight, and the remainder are branch lines. Increased investment has made or committed to or commitment to acquisition of rolling stock, locomotives, and the refurbishment of infrastructure, including signalling depots and maintenance network, has resulted in the grade that you see as of B+ in terms of the heavy haul lines and the general freight lines. However, there aren't bottlenecks that occur in sections of the network, and by certain upgrading, for example, the track over bridge areas, larger volumes can be accommodated in terms of increased demands for export. The existing general freight line network is in a fair condition. However, poor signalling and electrically related infrastructure along certain sections are the main contributors to section failures, and require special attention. We have seen a steady increase in collisions, with some decrease in perhaps rail derailments. However, getting to the branch lines, these are in a very, very poor state, with approximately only 55% being operational, so to speak, and even parts of these portion are in disuse. The lack of provisional rail service, maintenance, and investment in supporting this infrastructure has resulted in significant and increasing maintenance backlog within the track infrastructure, stations, and yards. General condition of PRASA, passenger intercity and commuter rail, which is approximately just over 2,000 kilometers, is fair. Signalling and building structures are in a poor condition. Capital investments are underway to address this backlog. However, operational issues with outdated equipment, vandalism, theft, arson need to be addressed to improve the situation and the poor performance of the rail and unreliable service. The Gautrain network, which is a new sector that we've introduced for this year, is 80 kilometers of rapid rail link in the Gauteng. It was commenced service in 2011, and it's in excellent condition overall. The high accountability measures put in place on the in the form of performance-based funding encourage efficient operation and sound maintenance practice. No major incidences affecting the structural integrity of the infrastructure has been reported. Getting to the hot topic, which is always a hot topic in a lot of people's circles, is the electricity sector. The Department of Energy has the legislative mandate, together with the Department of Public Enterprises, of ensuring energy security, oversight into the operations and running of the Electricity Supply Commission, ESCOM in this case, and safeguarding access and regulation to the energy sector. ESCOM generates approximately 43,000 megawatts of electricity, which is 95% of the country's total. And about 86% of this comes from coal. Demand for electricity supply has diminished over the last decade, and this, coupled with new generation capacity, has afforded ESCOM the opportunity to improve planned maintenance and refurbishment, which was sorely neglected between 2007 and 2015. Major capital investment will bring further capacity online over the next 5 years, and there may be a surplus capacity looking into the next 5 years. Of course, with the reliance on coal generation, environmental obligations will require further investment to achieve acceptable emission standards, particularly with the older coal-fired stations. The average age of ESCOM's coal-fired power stations is approximately 36 years, the oldest being Komati, which is at 52 years old, and we may see further decommissioning of certain coal-powered stations, for example, Hendrina, Camden, Grootvlei, and Komati. ESCOM has an increasing funding gap, and its governance pressures remain a major risk to the organisation. Renewable energy generation has become cheaper and is becoming cheaper, and the move generally and globally towards cleaner technologies and possibly independence from a national utility will increase the pressures on ESCOM. ESCOM has a national grid network of approximately 32,000 kilometers of high voltage lines with 427 transmission transformers. These are in acceptable condition with a reasonable maintenance regime. It can meet the current demand and deal with minor incidences over the network. However, this is also an aged asset with an overall average age of about 39 years, with the oldest substation and line greater than 60 years old in terms of that. And it's going to require continuous replacement and continuous maintenance and refurbishment. ESCOM's distribution network distributes about 52% of the grid electricity directly to its consumer, is on average in a significantly better condition than the local distribution network that is managed by 187 municipalities in South Africa. Inadequate operation and maintenance capacity and shortage of skilled personnel make the aging and overloaded distribution network very, very vulnerable. Policy uncertainty has also led to the periods of low investment in the municipal infrastructure. Here again, theft, vandalism, poor debt collection are a burden to the operation and maintenance budgets of municipalities are quite dependent on this. Healthcare. The public sector health estate is the responsibility of the Department of Health together with the Department of Public Works and provisional health departments, and in some instances municipality controlled. There are 347 hospitals, of which 3,500 clinics or healthcare centres are in the public service. Any condition of grade C and below in the context of healthcare facilities adversely affects patients' care and safety and places them and the staff at increased risk. Although data collection appears to have improved, it appears unaligned to sustainable asset management processes, hampering proper prioritization of spending and expansion. Furthermore, although investment in maintenance has increased, chronic underspending of budgets, as pointed out by National Treasury, and neglect are continuing, causing rapid deterioration in hospitals, especially tertiary and central facilities. There's intensive focus on the ideal clinic realisation and maintenance program in terms of the NHI pilot, and we've seen improved condition in certain clinics around the country. However, this often happens at the expense of other clinics, hospitals, and specialised facilities like mental health facilities, tuberculosis and malaria clinics. Much still needs to be done to increase investment in specialised skills in this particular arena. Basic education, and here there are two new subsectors, namely for universities and for technical and vocational education training colleges. This is the primary responsibility, well, public ordinary schools are the primary responsibility of the Department of Basic Education. There's approximately 24,000 public schools in South Africa, and there's significant progress made towards providing electricity, water, and sanitation in terms of the various schools. However, this has, in some areas, deprioritized general maintenance programs due to the expansion, resulting in maintenance backlogs and reduced reliability of water and electricity supplies at school. More than 10% of schools have unreliable electricity infrastructure, 20% of schools were found to have unreliable water supply, the maintenance of toilets and toilet systems. There are approximately 26 public universities and 50 public TVET colleges. We've seen a dramatically increase in the number of student intakes, probably you've seen that as well, Prof, in terms of the overall of the last couple of years, and this has created a severe burden on infrastructure and a severe burden on maintenance. Majority of university buildings are on average in good conditions in terms of our assessment, and this is partly due to new builds that have occurred. Asset management plans are in place at various universities, although accuracy of information and compliance varies across the spectrum. Maintenance capacity is often insufficient outside the major urban areas and sometimes tends to be more reactive and neglected. Infrastructure development and maintenance capacity is generally limited within the TVET sector. TVET colleges, especially in rural areas, lack sufficient funding and systems for maintenance, resulting in ad hoc repair. Their condition has deteriorated over the last 10 years. There has been considerable damage, as we've seen over the last year and a half, of vandalism, student protests at education institutions. And it's this unaffordable loss that diverts funding from maintenance and the construction of new facilities. Overall, in terms of the overall grade from a South African perspective, we believe our infrastructure is still, or built environment infrastructure is still of a high quality, but it's slightly below average grade, reflects the continuing low maintenance levels and even neglect in many areas, taking its toll on its resilience in terms of the infrastructure. We need a long-term commitment to long-term planning, adequate dedicated funding, proper management system, data collection, and skill deployments with collaboration of different players in the industry around that. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the report card grading for 2017.